Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are going to dive right into thoughts and cognitive distortions. If you have not seen the first video, I highly recommend you go back and watch that. That's just going to explain kind of why we're even at thoughts and cognitive distortions at this point. Also, as mentioned in the first video, I will not view or respond to any comments. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, please email me at utlcsw@gmail.com. Also, these videos are educational only. This is not used to replace therapy in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so if you are still going to therapy, I encourage you to go to therapy. These videos are not intended to be your therapist. These are just essentially ways to get information out. Like mentioned before, if something stands out to you, by all means, feel free to take this to a therapist if you are seeing one, but please do not let this replace actual therapy. Again, if you have not seen the first video about the CBT triangle, please go back and watch that, or you might be a little bit lost. If you already understand the CBT triangle, that's totally fine. You can just jump right in with us. So we're going to continue, and this video is going to focus on just the thoughts part of the triangle. So we're not going to talk about situation. We're not going to talk about emotion. We're not going to talk about behavior. We're only breaking down the thoughts. And what we're going to do, we're going to kind of do what are thoughts and cognitive distortions. I'm going to go through a list of 11 different thinking errors with you. I'm going to give you an example of those just so you can kind of start to see, oh, do I use this or don't I use this error? And then I'm going to kind of show you a little skill set that I do in individual therapy to kind of help people start breaking these down a little bit. If you are in a position where you're like, I want to identify my thinking errors, I encourage you to grab a pen, a pencil, paper, something to be able to write with if you want to identify these. As always, if you want worksheets or additional resources, just email me again, utlcsw@gmail.com. Okay, so we're going to dive in. Thoughts and cognitive distortions. Thoughts, as you remember from the first slide, is kind of that starting point of the triangle. So thoughts are just our own interpretations of situations that happen to us. So if you remember, the situation comes and then it starts that chain of events, thoughts, emotions, and behavior. We're just focused on the thoughts. So your thought process is essentially just how you think and interpret situations that happen to you. Okay, so what are thinking errors? Also known as cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions is the quote unquote therapeutic term that therapists will use. Thinking errors is just kind of the non-traditional way to say it. So I will use the term thinking errors, but if you are in therapy, sometimes they are also called cognitive distortions. Okay, these are errors in our thought patterns that contain elements of rigidity and irrationality. Thinking errors lead people to have negative emotional and or behavioral processes. There are a number of thinking errors, but throughout the video, I'm only going to use 11. As mentioned in that last video, like when you're doing math, if you continually have an error in your equation, your answer is going to be wrong, and your consequence essentially could be getting a bad grade. Now we're going to kind of show you what those errors are, and the same thing's going to happen to your emotion and your behavior. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start identifying these. So they are just errors within the thought process. As we go through these, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I do that one. Or no, I don't do that one. But from what I see, if I was to kind of take every client that I've ever seen, because I identify every single person that comes in my office, I identify their thinking errors almost right off the bat. Okay. If I had to put everybody in a collective group, I would say on average, I see people out of the 11 have between 5 and 8 out of the 11 is, I would say, what I typically see. So I tell people, don't feel bad if we go through these and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got that one and I've got that one. Is there something wrong with me? I've got that one. I tell people, don't feel bad. The majority of the population is just crippled with thinking errors. Hence why we have such negative emotions and behaviors throughout society. You're going to see more and more of that as we go. But like I mentioned, there are a lot of thinking errors. We are only going to focus on 11 today. Most of them, if not all of them, are exactly what they sound like. Okay, I'm going to try and break that down for you. But they do, once you get used to the errors, you're going to realize that the error actually is what it sounds like. So for example, the first one is all or nothing. It's exactly what it says. It's a very all or nothing way of thinking. So the thought example I have given is everything I do is for nothing because I can never seem to catch up. That's an all or nothing type of thought. So if you find yourself thinking in those absolute terms, always, never, forever, everything I do is always wrong, or everyone hates me, then it's probably safe to say that you have the all or nothing thinking error that's being used on quite a regular basis. Those are the ones you want to look for. You want to look for ones that you find are being used on a regular basis, because the ones that you're using on a regular basis are the ones we're going to want to help you dismantle. And we will get to a spot where you dismantle those. But for right now, I just kind of want you to take note of, oh, yep, I do have that error. Or nope, I don't have that error. Focus on the ones that you kind of use on a daily basis. If you're going to keep track, if you're just watching it for information, that's great too. So the second one, jumping to conclusions. It's exactly what it says. It's where you jump to a conclusion without necessarily having all of the facts. So the example I have provided, my friends will think I am dumb if I don't drink at the party. That person just jumped to that conclusion that her friends would think she was dumb. She didn't even necessarily have all the evidence and facts to back that up. She just automatically jumped to that conclusion. Okay. Also, if you noticed, oh, never mind. We'll get to that a little bit later. Okay. Number 3, mind reading. Mind reading is exactly what it says. It's when you think you can read other people's minds. So the example I have given is, she gave me a look when I was returning my book. She must think I'm so stupid. Okay. They take someone and they try to mind read them. This could also be used, teenagers going to school. Oh, so-and-so gave me a dirty look. I must have done something to them, or they must hate me. Or the receptionist wasn't very kind to me when I checked in. I wonder if I did something to her last time I was here. So they kind of try to mind read what other people might be thinking. That is an error. Number 4, personalization. This is exactly what it says. It's when you personalize things towards you that have nothing to do with you. For example, my daughter is struggling in school. I must be a bad parent. So just because the child is struggling, the parent automatically personalized it to them and said that they were the problem, without necessarily gathering the facts of, is my child missing school? Do they have missing work? Are they not understanding the material? Do they get along with their teacher? On and on and on and on. They just automatically personalized it to them. Okay, that's an error. Number 5, overgeneralization. This is the error that I like to call the dramatizers. Okay, so overgeneralization is kind of when people take it over the top. So for example, I didn't get the job I interviewed for, I will never get the job. So because one thing happens to them, now the rest of everything is just garbage. So if you notice, not only does that one become all or nothing, it also becomes overgeneralization. So if once you get used to the errors, you can actually start to see that one sentence can have 3 or 4 different errors within it. And if we have 3 or 4 different errors in our thoughts, you're going to have 3 or 4 different errors in your thought, in your emotions, and your behaviors, right? Because they're all linked together. So number 6, catastrophizing. This is the one I probably see the most. Catastrophizing is exactly what it says. It's when you catastrophize. You look into the future and it's always a negative light. So for example, I am going to fail my math test, then I won't graduate, then I won't get into college. So they just catastrophize over and over and over again about the future. They didn't know that they were going to fail their math test. Failing their math test probably would not lead to them not graduating. And it probably wouldn't lead to them not getting into college, but they catastrophize. I like to call catastrophizing the spiral. So it's one thing to jump to conclusions, but it's another to just spiral, which is essentially what catastrophizing is. Catastrophizing is also the what ifs. What if this? What if that? That is catastrophizing. That's an error. As you get going with these videos, we're actually going to take some time to help you identify different words and phrases within sentences that will further help you be able to recognize and identify and dismantle errors within the thought pattern. Okay, so number 7, emotional reasoning. This one also is exactly what it says. It's when you try to reason with your emotions. So for example, I feel worthless, so I am worthless. Essentially, whatever you feel, becomes a fact with emotional reasoning. That's why it's called emotional reasoning. I kind of start to reason with this emotional part of me, worthless. If you also look at that word worthless, that's an all or nothing type of word. So not only is I feel worthless, I am worthless, not only is it emotional reasoning because whatever you're feeling is in your mind a fact, it's also all or nothing. So there's an example again of how that statement had two errors. It actually has three in it, but we haven't identified the other error in there yet. But as you can see, there's three errors in that one sentence. We've identified two of them. Okay. Next one, should statement. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. I should have gotten up early for work this week. This is another error I see a lot of the times. I wish I would have said that. I wish I could have done this. I wish I could go back and say this. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. That one's a pretty simple one. Number 9, labeling. Labeling, again, exactly what it says. It's when you label yourself and or others in derogatory, not very nice terms. So the example, my therapist is the most unthoughtful person. So this person has labeled their therapist as unthoughtful. In the emotional reasoning example, that person labeled themselves worthless. In the personalization example, that parent labeled themselves as a bad parent. So it's essentially like taking a label maker and punching a name in and then labeling it on yourself or somebody else. That is what you can think of as labeling. Okay. You'll see a lot of labeling in individuals with I am a failure, I'm a loser, I'm not good enough. It becomes very labeling like and very all or nothing like. Okay, number 10, mental filter. Mental filter is when you have a good situation, but you kind of filter out the positives and only focus on the negatives. So you can think of it as an actual filtration system. I've got this situation. I'm going to filter out all the positive. I'm going to focus on the negative. I call this thinking error the negative Nancy's of the world. Okay, mental filter. The example given. My first day of school went well, but my outfit did not seem to fit right. My hair wouldn't go into the style I wanted it to, and I was unable to make it for lunch. So you have this good situation. First day of school, great day. But instead of focusing on that great day, they filtered that out and said, well, my outfit wasn't right, my hair wasn't right, and I didn't get to go out to lunch. They just focus on those negative aspects. If you're an adult and you have teenage children, they fall into this thinking error a lot. Also, as we go throughout these videos, if you find that I use a lot of teenager-like or younger kid-like examples, it is because I have a huge population of teenagers that I see. Teenagers is one thing I'm very passionate about because I always say, if I can get teenagers to a spot where they have dismantled the core belief system and go into society with having symptoms that are not rooted in anxiety and depression, we're going to have a better society. So I do a lot of work with teenagers. So if you're like, why is she use so many younger like examples? That's why. Okay. So number 11, the last one, disqualifying the positive. Again, exactly what it says. It's when you disqualify your own positivity, whether it's a positive attribute, a positive thing you did, a positive trait you have, you just disqualify it. So the example, yeah, I won the talent show, but the competition wasn't hard to compete against at all. So instead of giving themselves the credit, like, yeah, I had a really cool talent, I won, they discounted all of that, disqualified all of that, and said, well, it was the competition was just basically weak. Or someone can study for a test, they go in and they get an A, and instead of, oh, I worked so hard for this, I'm so excited that I got a good grade, instead it's, oh, I got the easy questions. I just got lucky. Okay. So those are some of the majority of the thinking errors I see. There are more of them, but these are the 11 that I personally focus on in individual therapy. And what I do is I will actually go through in session and take a list of these and I'll read them off just like I read them off. And people will say, yeah, I do that, or no, I don't. And what we do is I will go through and highlight the ones that people have. And then we kind of use that as a starting point of, okay, this is where we're at. These are the ones we need to break free from. Because some of these you might look at and be like, I don't ever do those. Some of these you're like, oh yeah. Some of these you're like, well, the example sounded familiar, but I'm not 100% sure. If you're not 100% sure or you want more information, worksheets, things like that, I can give that to you. That's not giving you therapy. So no matter what state you're in, I can provide you with resources that are online, completely free. If you are looking for more in-depth ways to kind of get into your thinking errors, or if you're like, hey, is there a worksheet I can take to my therapist and identify these in session, by all means, email me. That's not giving you therapy. I can give you those resources with no cost at all. Okay. So that is your identification. Those are the thinking errors. Like I said, in session, I go through and actually help people identify which ones they have. After we identify them, then we do the math problem activity, one of my favorite things that I do with an individual therapy. Okay, so why were we taught to show our work when we were taught math throughout school? If you watched the first video, I mentioned this, and earlier in this video, I mentioned this too, the math problem. So we were taught in school to show our work when we did math. Remember, we all hated it. We're like, we know the answer. Why do we have to show our work? Or we're like, we don't even understand the work, so we don't even want to go there. Okay. But they did that so we would increase our own awareness of our understanding. And also so the teacher could see, oh, this is where you went wrong, or this is where you're really thriving in relation to doing those equations. Okay. If you have an error anywhere in your equation or equations, the probability of your answer being incorrect is very high, as the work was done incorrectly. If you continually make the same error within your math problems, you're eventually not going to get a passing grade. So if we think of this as I'm sitting down and I'm going to take a test in math class, and I go through and I have a lot of errors in my work. If I get those answers wrong because I had errors, I'm probably not going to get a passing grade. That is my consequence. In math class, the consequence for having multiple errors is essentially not a good grade. The consequence for having errors in the real world with people is your emotions and behaviors are not going to make sense. They're going to be incorrect. You are going to be feeling emotions that you don't even know what the hell you're feeling, because the first go-to you're going to go to is anxiety, and I'm here to tell you that is wrong. And then you're going to go to a behavior that's going to be impulsive and or destructive. And then you're going to go in circles wondering why your life never seems to get back on track. Well, because your thought process isn't even on track. So consequence, negative emotion, negative behavior. Now we're going to do a little bit of math. This does not have to be anything crazy. If you're not good at math, don't worry. I can help you with this. We're going to take identified errors. I do this in session with people. Okay. So I've given you an example. Take your identified thinking errors and identify them by 11. So the total number of errors. If you remember in the previous slide, we identified 11 different thinking errors. Okay. This will give you a percentage. So for example, if you had 7 of the 11 errors, I'm going to divide those. How many I had versus the total. 7 divided by 11. That percentage is 36%. So 64% of your thoughts are rooted in errors, creating 64% of the time you have negative emotion and negative behavior. You're only functioning at 36% capacity. I know 11 is a little bit of a weird number, so let's tailor it down to 10. And let's say you came to session and you had 7 out of the 10 thinking errors. I divide 7 by 10. That's only 30% capacity that your brain is working at. That means what? 70% of the time, your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are rooted in errors, and they do not make sense, and they are more likely negative. 70% of the time. If you have 70% of your thoughts rooted in errors, 70% of your emotions and behaviors are said to be rooted in the same thing, because that's the driving force. The thoughts are the driving force. So the goal is to get you out of this. So if you come in and I'm like, okay, you've got 7 out of the 11, you're functioning at 36%. That's all you're functioning at. We've got 64% of thoughts rooted in errors, creating 64% of the time having negative emotion and behavior. We have a problem. This is why you're in therapy, essentially. This is why you're here. Okay. So this is by no means 100% definitive that, oh my gosh, my brain's only working at 20%. That's not definitive. This is just an activity that I show people to really put it in perspective of how much of your thought is rooted in an error. And if your thought is rooted in that much of an error, evidently speaking, the emotions and the behaviors are going to be rooted in the same amount because they follow. Okay. This is not, like I said, definitive. If you come to this and you do the math and you are functioning at 36% capacity, that does not mean you're always at 36%. This is just an activity to kind of really put it in perspective for people of, oh, this is why I'm in therapy. This is making a lot of sense. I do have a lot of negative emotions. I do have a lot of avoidant behaviors. And it's because my brain's not even functioning correctly because I've got all of these errors. Just like if I'm doing math, if I have errors, I'm not going to get very far. Okay. But again, I don't want you to go tell your therapist that some girl online told me I'm only functioning at 20%. It's not definitive. This is just an exercise to really put it in perspective for you that Houston, we have a problem. Okay. So like I said, not definitive. Okay. So after we do the math problem activity, now we move on to the skill set. So in individual therapy, I provide people their error identification. I identify those. I go through and I do the math activity with them to kind of put things in perspective. And then people were like, okay, well, we've identified these errors and, you know, we've learned that I'm not doing so hot. So what are we going to do about that? Where's my skill set? Mr. Murderman becomes the skill set. I already know what the thoughts are because when I do this in individual therapy, if I could film people's faces when I say we're going to do Mr. Murderman, I probably could sell it online and be very rich with how funny people's faces are when I say this. People are like, how in the hell does murder have anything to do with my thoughts? And I'm like, well, you'll see. Some people kind of catch me midway through and they're like, I'm on to you. And some people get to the end and they're like, I don't get it. Okay. One of the things that I do in individual therapy that I will not do in this video is after I've identified what errors somebody has, I actually go back through and will try to provide examples of when that person has used them. So for example, if I have a client that used that personalization thinking error, right? The one where my daughter's not doing good in school, so I must be a bad parent. If they provide that as an example for me, I will actually go through and write all these examples down to then use them for this activity. We will not do that here because I'm really just trying to get the skill set across to you. So Mr. Murderman is the skill set to start dismantling thinking errors. Okay. Thinking errors is part of the triangle. This is the skill set to combat that. So Mr. Murderman is an activity that I created to help people challenge their thinking errors. I will discuss more about the specifics of how this helps challenge errors after the activity is completed. I will read you a story and then we will essentially go to court, quote unquote. Okay. Trigger warning, this activity does have a minor depiction of murder. It is not to offend anybody. It is not in any way, shape, or form a true story. It's actually a pretty cheesy story that I have created. If you are a therapist and you are looking to create something similar, by all means, feel free to use it, create it, do with it what you will. It is not copywritten in any way. Again, it is just a skill set to help people combat thinking errors. So I'm going to read you the story that I have created. It's literally just on paper. It's kind of cheesy. Like I said, it's not meant to depict anything crazy. It's just the skill set for your errors. Okay. So I'm going to read you the story and then you're going to see when it kind of shifts over to going into court. Okay. So here we go. Jane has been found murdered in her home. She has been found to have multiple stab wounds as well as defensive marks. The condition of her body and home show signs of a struggle. However, the struggle seems to have started after entering, as there is no evidence to suggest a struggle getting into the home. This suggests she knew who was entering. Her son-in-law Ted had come by earlier to drop some belongings off to her. Her and Ted have a good relationship, but they have had moments of weakness in the past. Her neighbor Bob stopped by earlier to drop off some fresh baked bread. Bob brings this to her after she broke up with him as an I'm sorry gift for his behavior leading up to their breakup. She conversed with her son-in-law for a little bit and discussed some upcoming weekend plans she had with him and her daughter. She conversed with the neighbor about her upcoming weekend plans and thanked him for the bread. Around 8 p.m., Jane started getting ready for bed when she heard a knock at her door. She opened the door and let them in, but she soon realized that was a mistake. The perpetrator started to tackle her, eventually pinning her to the floor. They pulled out a knife and started to stab her multiple times. After quite the fight, the perpetrator left the home. The police determined that the two people who last saw her were her son-in-law and her neighbor. No neighbors around her heard anything, but one neighbor reports seeing Bob leave her home in a fast-paced manner. Ted seemed to have an alibi of being at home with his spouse at the time of the murder. The police corroborate this. This does check out. Upon questioning Bob, he reports the last time he saw Jane was when he dropped the bread off. He states why he is unsure why a neighbor stated they saw him fleeing Jane's home in a fast-paced manner around the time of the murder, as he states he has been home watching out the window while drinking his nighttime tea. His alibi cannot be checked out as there is no one to corroborate this. Soon the police search him, and at first they don't find much, but they do note scratches on his forearm. After refusing to take a DNA test, they arrest him. Okay, welcome to court. So I've read you this story, and again, this is exactly what I do in individual therapy. I read them this story. Now we go to court. Bob is on trial for the murder of his neighbor Jane. Bob was witnessed to be leaving the scene of the murder by a neighbor in a fast-paced manner. Do you send him to jail? All of my clients will kind of think about this for a minute, and they'll say, no, that's not necessarily enough. It was dark. The neighbor could have thought she saw Bob, but it really could have been somebody else. And I say, okay, so let's move forward. The police investigated and found scratch marks on Bob's forearms and DNA under Jane's fingernails, but this has not been tested. Do you send him to jail? My clients go, well, no, the DNA hasn't been tested. You can't send him to jail. And I say, okay, let's move on. Since this, the police have searched Bob's home and they found a bloody shirt in the washer. They also learned that Bob and Jane were once in a relationship together, which may be the motive. Do you send him to jail? And my clients go, well, you're getting closer, but not quite yet, because that blood could have been from a nosebleed. It could have been from an animal. That blood hasn't necessarily been tested. And just because they were together, yeah, that could be a motive, but we just don't have enough yet. And I say, fair enough, let's keep going. There were shoe prints left at the scene, and soon after, the police find Bob's shoes. They are a match. Do you send him to jail? And my clients sometimes will be like, oh, some people will say, yes, send him, it's a match. Other people will say, no, because if they were in a relationship, that means more than likely his shoe prints would be in her house. And he was over at her house earlier dropping bread off. So yeah, that's a good piece of evidence, but it's not necessarily definitive. So my clients say, we got to keep going. And I say, fair enough, let's keep going. The police do a final search and they end up finding pants with blood on them and a knife in Bob's closet that seems to match the wounds. Police take the matching shoe prints, the shirt and the pants found with blood on them, and the knife in for DNA testing. All of the DNA testing comes back and matches Bob. Do you send him to jail? And my clients are like, yep, lock him up. That's it. Let's get rid of him. And I say, why? And they say, well, the evidence matched. He 100%, everything matched, DNA, shoe prints, blood, everything matches, put him in jail. And I say, fair enough. And then I will ask people, did you catch how this tied into your thinking errors? And some people will be like, absolutely not. And other people will be like, I got it. If you are still lost, Mr. Murderman ties into your thinking errors by use of evidence. If you do not have evidence to support your thinking error, that is a sign that you need to reframe that error. Reframing is not going to happen for a long time. Okay. Reframing, we've still got, 20 videos before you get to there. I always tell people when you come to therapy for me, I'm going to build and build and build and build. I'm not going to dive right in because I want to build things up. So when we get to a point, you can essentially start processing things yourself. So this is kind of all part of that process. So we're not going to reframe yet, but you do need to use evidence. So now let's go back to that thinking error, personalization. My daughter's struggling in school, so I must be a bad parent. I will then go back and say, what evidence do you have to support that? And my clients will go, well, none. And I'm like, right. So that's a good indication that thought is not working. That thought is not working, because even before we go break down everything, evidently speaking, your emotion, if you're a bad parent, your emotion is not going to be anything necessarily good. Okay. So let's go to the next slide so we can kind of get into evidence use. That's what this is all about. After doing this activity, you can see there had to be a substantial amount of evidence used to send Bob to jail. You must do the same with your thoughts. We must provide the evidence to support or desupport our thoughts. When we do not have sufficient evidence to support our thoughts, that is an indication reframing is necessary. That will come with more skills at a later modality. But knowledge is key. You cannot fix what you do not recognize. You cannot fix what you do not have the evidence to support or desupport. If I go back to the thinking error page and we go through every single one of those thinking errors, I can actually show you what evidence do we have to support that. And I can even show that to you right now. If we go back to thinking error identification, okay, we go to all or nothing. Everything I do is for nothing because I can never seem to catch up. Well, first of all, what does that mean? That will also come later. But what evidence do you have to support that everything you do is for nothing? What evidence do you have to support that you can never catch up? Right? Jumping to conclusions. My friend will think I'm dumb if I don't drink at the party. What evidence do you have to support that your friends are going to think that? What evidence do you have to support that you're not going to drink at the party? Right? Mind reading. She gave me a look when I was returning my book. She must think I'm so stupid. What evidence do you have to think that what evidence do you have to support that she thinks you're stupid? None. We already did personalization. Overgeneralization. I didn't get the job I interviewed for. I will never get a job. What evidence do you have to support that you're never going to get a job? Catastrophizing. I'm going to fail my math test. I won't graduate. I won't get into college. What evidence do you have to support that? Okay. The more you use the evidence skill, the more you're going to find you do not have evidence to support your thoughts. The one thinking error that you actually will have evidence to support is your should statement. Okay, for example, I should have gotten up early for work this week. Well, if we go back and look at the evidence, there's probably good indication that you should have gotten up earlier. For example, if I had a meeting at 9 a.m. and I didn't get up till 8 and then I was running late, yeah, I probably have evidence to support I should have gotten up early. The rest of your errors, you're not necessarily going to have the evidence to support it. Okay. And if you do have the evidence to support it, you still need to reframe it because it's still rooted in an error. It's not necessarily what people say, it's how they say it. You're going to learn that again much later. But for this video, you identified your thinking errors. Okay. Let's go through and see if we can change slides. Maybe. You did Mr. Murderman, the activity, and you learned about your evidence use. Okay. This is what you want to start using. Evidence, evidence, evidence. Okay. In the next video, we're actually going to kind of put thoughts on the back burner, or we're going to switch solely over to emotion. So we're going to break down the use of appropriate emotion, and I'm going to show you how detrimental it is to use anxiety as an emotion. Okay. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed. Again, as always, questions, comments, concerns, email me at utlcsw@gmail.com. Okay, see you guys later.